Pat Hutchings is a senior scholar with the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA. Her work is focused on a variety of strategies for creating a campus culture of teaching and learning: student learning outcomes assessment, assignment design, integrative learning, peer collaboration and review of teaching, and the scholarship of teaching and learning. Prior to working with NILOA, she was a senior scholar and vice president with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Recent publications include The Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Reconsidered, Institutional Integration and Impact with Huber and Ciccone. This session will focus on the growing international movement for the scholarship of teaching and learning and she turns the page. Obviously didn't put a page break in the right place. Opportunities to provide for faculty to share and learn from each other's pedagogical work in ways that strengthen student learning and success.
All right. Can you hear me? Too loud? Okay, about right? Great, thanks. Speaking of audio, I had a funny thing happen this morning during your session, John Marshall. I had my phone muted, sitting on the table, and when you said, and on the right, Siri came on, or somebody came on and said, and your destination is on the right. So I'm going to nevertheless leave that on because I can check the time easily. So, you know, we are coming sort of toward the end of the several, it's only 2 days. And let me just take the opportunity to thank the conference organizers and all of you for being here and sharing your work. I've learned a lot over these 2 days, and I'm really glad I could be here both days. I just wish my session had been a little earlier, so. All right, but onward, okay. Yes, I'm from NILOA, and a few people have asked me about that, so I'm going to just give you a little nutshell version of what NILOA is and does. It's the National Institute, as you see, for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA. Anyone know who the founding director was? George Koo, yes. So George is my colleague. NILOA is located or headquartered at the University of Illinois, but we're a distributed operation, so there are, depending on how you count, I don't know, 8 or 10 of us around the country. I live north of Spokane, Washington. And our mission is to, this is not the official language, but our mission is to seek out and study and promote approaches to the assessment of student learning outcomes that stand some chance of actually making a difference in the experience and learning of students. And it turns out that's quite a challenge, but we are making progress. You'll hear a little bit from me about that today, though my focus is not mainly on assessment, it's on the scholarship of teaching and learning. I see those as kind of cousins to each other, though, so lots of common denominators. The other thing you see on the title slide here is a reference to the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. That was my previous position. I was there for about a dozen years, and I put it up on this slide because I'm actually going to draw heavily on work that I was involved in and helped to lead at Carnegie over the, well, from 97 to 2009. So I've been gone for a while. But I was part of a team directing a project on the scholarship of teaching and learning, and as I said, I'm going to be drawing from that. So I wanted to acknowledge my sources and my affiliations here. So let's see here. All right. Oh. Am I doing the wrong? Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's something that you just heard read. This is my session description, or a little bit about it. And I want to just highlight sort of the things that are highlighted here, which is to say that a lot of the sessions, wonderful sessions over the last 2 days, have been mainly, not exclusively, but mainly focused on what you can do in your classes with your students. I want to step back from that a little bit and think with you, and there have been some good questions about this, about how to sustain that work and how to build on it. And the argument, or the invitation maybe, that I want to issue is to think about that through the scholarship of teaching and learning. And you see, I have called it a movement. I'm not sure what the tipping point into a movement is, but it's been around for quite a while now. It was sort of launched or at least named by the former president of the Carnegie Foundation, Ernest Boyer, back in 1990. Since then, it's spread to many campuses. Faculty from all different fields are engaged in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. There's an international society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. I've kind of lost track, but I think there are 800 or 900 members, an annual conference. So there's a lot going on. And I wanted to look at that with you because it seemed to me that some of what goes on I have a kind of big tent version or vision of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, maps onto things that you're doing or almost doing with a little bit of a nudge, all of which aims to strengthen student learning and success. So that's my premise, that this might map onto your experience, but I thought since this is a conference in large part about the importance of evidence, it would be good to do a little classroom or conference assessment here, a little background knowledge probe. So this is a raise your hand experience, very easy after lunch. How many of you would say the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is an important part of my professional work? Yeah, 59%. That's impressive. And you can vote more than once. I may have been doing it, but I'm not sure. Nobody. I'm not sure if it's the I may or I'm not sure that's getting the no response. I've heard the term, but I'm not quite sure what it would entail for me. Okay, yeah, a few of those. The scholarship of what? No one will raise their hand at that one, right? I'm not a scholar of teaching and learning, but I play one on TV. So you have to watch TV to get that one, but all right. So clearly, a lot of you sort of see yourselves as part of this movement, or at least beginning to be part of this movement. So what I want to do is kind of in two chunks, the plan. First, to talk about what we're talking about. What do we mean when we use that term? And this is actually a big debate, in the movement. There's a lot of talk about, is it this or is it that? Should we talk about it this way or that way? So you're going to get my sense of what we're talking about. And in part, you'll be getting it through some examples, which point to or are aimed at pointing to some very different ways that this work can look, depending on where you are, who you are, your discipline, your students, and your questions. I want to go from that to a sort of bigger sort of frame for thinking about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Why should we care about it? Because I see it, at least, as a reflection of and an accelerator of a culture of teaching and learning. And there were some good questions yesterday. Kevin asked one, as I recall, about sort of, sustaining this work and building a culture. Chantal invoked that kind of language as well. How do you build a culture in which this kind of work, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or whatever you want to call it, can really be sustained and thrive? I've got some resources and sort of pointers to other possibilities tacked on at the end. We'll just sort of zoom through those. There are some interactive elements along the way. And my slides, this is just to remind me to say, my slides will be available, so you don't need to madly take notes. Now, I thought about saying at the beginning of this slide, what would you like to do? But I was too scared to do that, so maybe you can coach me a little bit, John Marshall. Okay, so first then, what are we talking about here? And one of the ways I like to sort of make my way into this topic is through something, I've quoted this so many times it's embarrassing, but I found it to be a powerful sort of lens on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, comes from Randy Bass at Georgetown University. And Randy writes, one telling measure of how differently teaching is regarded from traditional scholarship or research within the academy is what a difference it makes to have a problem in one versus the other. And he goes on to explain that when you're talking about research or scholarship, you want to have a problem or a question or an issue, something that's unresolved. He uses the language of problem, of course. He's in English. He likes to talk about problematics. Me too. So in research, you want to have a problem. It's the engine for inquiry. It's the way you connect with other people who are also exploring that problem. In teaching, he says, in contrast, if you have a problem, you probably want either to hide it or, a little better, to fix it. And so here is the punchline. Changing the status of the problem in teaching from terminal remediation, something you want to get rid of, to ongoing investigation, an engine for inquiry, is precisely what the movement of a scholarship of teaching and learning is all about. So this is from an essay, as you see here, called The Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, What's the Problem? And Randy's thinking about this is not, as they say, purely academic. He was coming up, he was a young faculty member at that time. He was coming up for tenure. He'd been exploring all kinds of technology in his classroom, digital pedagogies, and the students weren't liking it. And so he had seen a big dip in his student ratings, and he was trying to think about that problem and how to turn that into something positive. Okay, so that's Randy. Here's my short version of it. And, oh, this is maybe not the latest version of these. Okay, bringing our knowledge, skills, and habits as scholars to our work as teachers. If you rearrange those words, which I thought I had done, it turns out to be a haiku. So more operationally, what does this work entail? Getting involved means, I've got sort of 4 things here. Asking questions about your students' learning. It might be a question about motivation. It might be a question about what kind of goes on in week 8 of a calculus class that causes such problems. You can, sort of fill in your own sense of questions and problems there. One of the things we found in the Castle program at Carnegie is that one of the things that motivated faculty to get involved in this work was because they had questions about their students' learning that they wanted to explore. So that's where it starts. Then gathering and analyzing evidence to help answer those questions. And I've underlined help because I think one of the things I want to kind of inoculate against is the sense that this is the kind of work that will give us the answer forever and definitively. We're really talking about approximations here. This will shed a little light on a problem that you care about that matters for your students. And it will probably lead you to a next set of questions. Putting those insights into practice, this is, if you will, action research or practitioner research. It's about bringing what you learn to bear in the things that you actually do, and documenting what you do or have done in ways that others can build on. Teaching has long been, even now I think, an activity which goes on behind doors that are closed both metaphorically and otherwise. And part of the impetus behind the scholarship of teaching and learning is to open those classroom doors so we can learn from one another. So documenting does not, underline, does not necessarily mean a publication in a juried, peer-reviewed journal. It might mean talking to your department colleagues. It might be coming to a conference like this and sharing what you're doing. So lots of different ways. So what I'd like to do now is look at 4 examples of the scholarship of teaching and learning from 4 different fields. All of these are from CASTLE, the Carnegie Academy for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And consequently, because you heard me say I left there in 2009, they're from a long time ago. And I have photos of people that you would no longer recognize. I know that's true of my photo as well. So, all right, so let me move around a little bit here. Get a drink. Okay, so first example, I'm too close. First example comes from a neighbor institution here, from the University of Notre Dame. This is Dennis Jacobs. And the kind of question he started with is a does it work question. So here's sort of the scenario here. Dennis was teaching the introductory chemistry course at Notre Dame. And what he found is a large number of students coming to his office during office hours, having great difficulty and preparing to drop the course. He was concerned, I mean, of course that's concerning, and he was concerned about it, he said, because in his view it meant not just dropping a 3 or 4 credit hour course, but abandoning a dream they had for themselves for the future, because this is a gatekeeping course. And if you don't pass it, you don't go on, not in this arena. And so he said his empathy went to them and he felt a responsibility to try something new. And what he did then was to create a new course for at-risk students with much more collaborative work, more conceptual problems. And he wanted to know, does this new course work? He was interested in that question for sort of personal and pragmatic reasons. He was spending a lot of time trying to make it work, and he wanted to see if it was worth it. Additionally, his colleagues in the department wanted to know if it worked. And I might add that they were skeptical about whether it was even a good idea to get more students successfully through the course. So there you hear some of the cultural sort of baggage that comes along with this work. The answer, Dennis found, was yes, it did work. And I'm not going to dive into the weeds here of all of the things he did to document that. But suffice it to say, he was looking both at sort of long-term trends, at up-close sort of video of small group work. He had lots of different kinds of evidence. Okay, so that's Dennis. I wonder how many of you would say that the questions that you are exploring or might explore are of a sort of does it work variety. Yeah, what we found in the CASTLE program is that that's where most people start. You're trying something new, and it's a very natural thing to say, yeah, I wonder, how's this working? Is it working? Is it better? Okay, so that's does it work? Here's another kind of question, a what does it look like question. This is a much more descriptive kind of question. And my example here is Jose Feito from St. Mary's College of California. He was teaching a required 2-semester great book seminar. And he was very interested in how you create what he sees as sort of the sine qua non of a seminar, that sense of intellectual community. And he had some ideas about how he might improve or strengthen or deepen the sense of intellectual community in his class. And so he was actually, his first thinking about this project was that it was a does it work question. He wanted to figure out whether he could do it better. And what he realized early on was that there was a prior question he needed to explore. And that was about what he even meant when he used the term intellectual community, how you would know one if you had one, and what the components of intellectual community are. Now, of course, there are different ways to answer that question, but what Jose did was to look at what was going on in his seminar without any fancy new intervention, to audio tape and analyze class sessions, to do focus groups with students, and he then came up with, let's see, do I have a, well, somewhere on here there's a laser, 5 facets of intellectual community. And he's written about these in other settings, and he then went on to sort of a next project, which really was more of a does it work, where he was able to intervene in some way. The third type of question is really a variation on that one, also sort of descriptive. This is John Miller, who taught management. I'm pretty sure he's retired at this point. And what he wanted to look at was what it would look like if we taught management as a liberal arts course. And his argument was that, in fact, the kinds of capacities and skills and dispositions that are important to management, to effective management, really map onto what most institutions identify as, sort of broad cross-cutting intellectual, broad cross-cutting institutional outcomes or general education outcomes. And you see them listed there, and you can probably think of some more. What did he do? This was not an intervention, really. He was trying some new things, but all he did was to keep track of them. He was not trying to ask if they worked. He was just trying to document what it would look like to teach the management course that he was teaching in a way that was more liberal artsy, if you will. So we have his curriculum and so forth. So this is really the scholarship of teaching and learning as a vision of the possible. It also was a way, all of these projects are, but this one I think hits this especially clearly, a way of addressing what my former boss at the Carnegie Foundation, Lee Shulman, called the dry ice problem, which is that teaching disappears at room temperature like dry ice. We don't have habits of documenting it and preserving it so we can go back and study it and share it with others. So this is, a modest but important step in that direction. And finally, theory building. Excuse me. So this is Mariolina Salvatore from my field of English. And her question was about how to help students who were really sort of paralyzed when they came to something hard in a text. And she taught hard literary texts. And what she found was that her students, who were variously prepared, if I can put it that way, were often put off when they hit one of those moments. They would blame the problem on the author, or perhaps, maybe even worse, see it as an indication of their own deficits. So what Mariolina was after was to help use some of the theories of the field about how we interpret and make that never happens, make meaning of texts, and help her students see that sometimes, often, it's in those moments of difficulty that meaning emerges. And what you want to do, rather than pushing them away, though that's maybe a natural inclination, is to engage with them and try to figure out what's going on. And so the intervention that she came to in all of this was something she called the difficulty paper, which you can kind of imagine what it is. It's an assignment she would give it repeatedly, so they got better at it, in which students would be asked to identify a part of a text that was difficult for them and talk about why. What makes it difficult? And students get better and better at this, and they begin to see, as she says, that you can embrace difficulty and use it. She also wrote a book with a colleague about this with a really cool title of The Elements and Pleasures of Difficulty. It's a very interesting book because it's aimed not just at faculty, but at students, very explicitly at both audiences. So it's sort of a textbook as well as a other book. I don't know what to call it. All right. So, just check the time. So I wanted to share those 4 examples because they feel interesting in and of themselves, to me at least, but also because I see them as a kind of window or a reflection of what I've called here an early and abiding tension in the scholarship of teaching and learning. On the one hand, there's a kind of small tent version of the scholarship of teaching and learning, which obviously doesn't accommodate all that many people. So in this version of things, the scholarship of teaching and learning is for the experts, whether it's for people from the field of education or maybe social scientists or whatever, but it's a small group. That's one vision. The other is a big tent version, which makes much more room for a much wider swath of the faculty. And when I use the word faculty, I mean educators, faculty, anybody who works with students around issues of teaching and learning in a residence hall or in a tutoring center. That's my lunch table. So a bigger a bigger tent view of the scholarship of teaching and learning that would accommodate all of the 4 examples that I just shared with you, and that would accommodate the work that all of you are doing, whether you've ever called it or thought of it as the scholarship of teaching and learning or not. So the scholarship of teaching and learning in this big tent view, this is kind of obvious maybe at this point, encompasses a full range of disciplines. I think humanists especially, like myself, have had a challenge thinking about where their methods and questions and so forth would fit. We want them to. Different kinds of questions, different kinds of methods, some statistical and quantitative, some much more qualitative. Mariolina Salvatore's work really depends on close reading of texts and student texts. Pitched at different levels, you can look at an individual assignment, you can look at a course transformation, you can look at a whole program, like how you think about management as a field. Different ways of going public, a meeting with your department colleagues, a book, and you can fill in lots of other examples. All of those contributing to what I want to call, what I have called, a teaching commons. So my colleague Mary Huber and I, we were sort of co-leading this project for many years, did a sort of first study of the program early on in a book that you see here, which came out in 2005, The Advancement of Learning, Building the Teaching Commons. The Teaching Commons, communities of educators committed to pedagogical inquiry and innovation, where they can come together to exchange ideas about teaching and learning and use them to meet the challenges of educating students for personal, professional, and civic life. That's a big tent version of this work. It's about a big conversation with a lot of different angles and points of view and contexts. The notion of the commons, well, Mary and I don't take credit for this, but we've been very struck by how people have picked up on that metaphor. I mean, it is a metaphor. We're hearing campuses creating things called commons, sort of a teaching and learning center called a commons. The MLA, the Modern Language Association, my professional association, has created a humanities commons where members can post assignments and syllabi and what all, and share them with one another. I won't go on, but suffice it to say, somehow this has really caught on. And my notion is that one of the reasons this notion of a teaching commons has caught on is that it goes to the notion of culture. It's not just about this or that study. It's about the larger academic culture in which that kind of work can be done and matter. So I'm now going to turn the slide, and really try to think with you a little bit more concretely about what we're talking about when we talk about an academic culture that really values teaching and learning, sees them as a site, if you will, for inquiry, for reflection, for conversation, and for ongoing sort of iterative improvement. Oh, and here's a quote that I found a number of years ago. A colleague sent it to me. The search is on for new and more powerful ways to engage today's diverse students, but campuses need more than new techniques. They need a culture where new approaches can take hold and thrive. As I say, I really liked that quote, and I liked it even better when I found out that I was the one who wrote it. I had no recollection of this. I had no record of this. I started searching with my colleague's help because she'd found it. And it was in Inside Campus or some magazine that I don't even know if it exists anymore. And I had to pay $35 just to get a copy of my own piece, which I guess is just punishment for not keeping my own files in very good order. All right. So that was just an aside. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to invite you to think a little bit about this notion of a culture of teaching and learning. I'm kind of begging the question here of what we mean by this, because that's where we're going. But think about Likert scale, 1 to 4. On the one side, think of your campus or your context. It might be a department or a program or whatever context you want to have in mind here. On the one hand, really no indicators of a culture of teaching and learning. I'd be surprised if there are very many of those in this room. And on the other end of the continuum, there are multiple mutually enforcing indicators. So I've got a two-part task for you. First, individually, oh, you've even got some note cards. Those aren't mine, but I'm pretty sure you can use them. Where would you put your campus or department or, as I say, whatever context on that continuum? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll give you a little cue to go ahead with this if you don't already do so. Talking together, that might mean in two, or if you have a table where you can all hear each other. Why would you say so? What's in your head about the markers of a culture of teaching and learning? So we'll hear some of those, and then I'm going to turn a corner and point to 3 that seem especially striking to me. I will be amazed if they don't come out of your discussions as well. So, okay, clear enough? Go.
All right. I'm going to pull you back together here. Can you hear me? Thank you. So I'm just interested in some quick sort of call-outs for things you identified at your table as indicators of this culture, whether it's undeveloped or very developed. So let's see here. Do we have a volunteer table somewhere? Okay. You've been volunteered, so.
Reward structure?
Reward structure. Anybody else mention reward structure? Yeah, of course. We'll come to that in a bit. Thank you. That's a big one. Other possibilities. Was there a hand over here? Well, here.
Seconding that one.
Oh, seconding that one? Okay, over here. Who am I giving this to? Do you hear?
I do.
There you go.
Okay. Well, we kind of agreed on that culture here is kind of at like a 3. And some of the indicators we looked at are the 150 professors that excellent teaching professors who are on the campus and honoring them. We have a teaching academy that focuses on graduate student development in teaching as well as faculty, as well as we have, what else did I miss? A center. We have a center, and many campuses do not have that, and so that's the main thing.
That's great. So pointing at there is a little echo of reward structure, or at least rewards, but also structures and infrastructures that support conversation. 1 or 2 more. Yeah, over here. I think I've lost my remote. It'll get found.
So we said we thought we were moving that needle over because when we have our workshop development, we don't have to beg and plead for people to come. We just have to remind them that it's happening, and we get faculty there.
That's great. So a hunger and interest in talking with others and doing the work of the scholarship of teaching and learning, or whatever you want to call it. Is there one more out there that we haven't heard? Thank you. Anybody? Going? Yep. Jenny?
One thing that comes to my mind is, in terms of an indicator, is how many different departments are involved in this. And here at Purdue, we have our teaching and learning technology people, we have library people, we have the center, we have all the faculty fellows that work with both STEAM and CIE and all of their departments. And with the grant that I work on, we had all of the department heads were involved. And so the breadth of people that are involved seems like a good indicator too.
That's great. Absolutely right. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that back. Okay, so as I say, I've identified 3. I think they do sort of map onto yours. It could be a list of 7, but time is running out. So I just want to acknowledge my sources for these things. This is just a subset, certainly, of context that I've drawn on over the years. This has been, as you saw from the article from 1996, something I've been thinking about for a while. So yeah, the work here on this campus and in this community, the Scholarship of Teaching and the Castle program from Carnegie. Here's the most recent book about it. I don't know how to do the laser. The Bayview Alliance, another project I'm connected with, which is, very briefly, 9 research universities doing STEM reform. And finally, NILOA. So you'll hear a little bit more about some of the things that George promised I'd talk about yesterday. So, okay, so first, a big indicator of a culture of teaching and learning is that people talk to each other, and they have good conversations. Not just passing in the night or in the hallway, and not just carping about students, which gets us nowhere. So, you know, when you think about how would you organize those conversations, there are lots of different ways, and you could, I'm sure, add to this. I want to talk a little bit, thanks, George, about the 6th of these, work on the design of assignments as a context for good conversation about teaching and learning. And so just kind of backing up, NILOA's work on assignment design began, gosh, about 6 years ago, I guess. We were interested in assignments because assignments can provide authentic evidence of student learning, which is what you want for assessment, and NILOA is all about assessment. But we were interested in them as well because not only do you get good assessment data, you have powerful experiences for students. Good assignments are pedagogical engines. They are what fuel learning. It's the things we ask students to do, not just opportunities. There's a George theme. And so what we did was to invite faculty from around the country to apply, to participate in a day-long workshop, which we called a charrette, a term that we borrowed from architecture, which is a collaborative occasion for design work. And I won't go through the whole protocol here, but it's very, very embarrassingly simple. And people love it because they have a chance to show one another their draft assignments. In some sense, all assignments are drafts because they're always works in progress, always changing as circumstances change and as we get smarter about them. And what we have as a result of that work is an online searchable assignment library. This is on the NILOA website, right there, where you can find assignments from these faculty who've gone through this sort of peer collaboration and review process, and the reflective memo about the assignment, where I can explain some things you'd need to know in order to make sense of it, and some kind of representation answering the question, how will this work be evaluated? It might be a rubric, often is a rubric. But what was most interesting about this, we had 4 cohorts go through this, and that led to 70 or 80 assignments in the library, is that the people, as they walked out the room at the end of that day of charrette work, said, this is great, can't wait to have my assignment in the library, but what I really want to do is go home and engage my colleagues in this same process of sharing and peer review. And so we've been trying to stoke that fire because this is an opportunity, these campus-based charrettes now, to recognize and share. You can read those. And we've created a toolkit of materials to help you do this. Anything you can imagine you might need is in this toolkit. So, pulling back from the assignment design work as an instance of a way to organize good conversations about teaching and learning, what are the sort of qualities of a good conversation? Structured and focused, not just all over the map, informed by evidence. There's the NILOA assessment peg. Reflective, sustained, it isn't just once. And inclusive, includes librarians and student affairs folks and residence hall directors, again, faculty in the broadest sense of the term. And students, which brings me, and food, you have to have food. But students, I want to really zero in on that dimension of inclusiveness. Thinking about the roles that students might play in this work, not just in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, but in this work to build a culture and to be in the business of inquiring and improving the experience of the student. So what I've pulled out here are 2 volumes that have really opened up this question in brilliant ways. The first is from 2010, the other one more recent, 2017. Some of you may know these. I want to just tell briefly the story of the earlier of these. This was a product of Carnegie's work on the scholarship of teaching and learning, and it kind of went like this. At Western Washington University, as part of their participation in this program, they got a group of faculty and others together to talk about their students' experience. And along the way, someone piped up and said, "There are no students at this table." And they then set themselves the task of opening up the circle, creating occasions where students could be part of the conversation, and from there went on to begin building attention to the learning process explicitly into courses. I don't mean every course. There were some sort of dedicated courses that did that. And there are lots of different ways to involve students in this work. They can work with a faculty member to, transform a course or a curriculum. They can analyze data. They can be involved in formulating the original question, blah, 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 blah. Here's the experience in a nice nutshell from one of the students who was part of one of those courses at Western Washington University. This is from Eric. "I had a class where we studied how we learn. It flipped a switch, and once it's flipped, it can't be turned off." So that's all by way of saying, think about the roles that students can play in the work you're doing and in building this culture. Okay, and here we come to the rewards issue. Third big thing. And here's the bad news. This comes from a study of the Castle program, which was 12 years long, and toward the end involved more than 100 campuses. And in our analysis of the work that those campuses were doing and reporting back to Carnegie, here's what we found. A troubling gap between the rhetoric about teaching's value and the realities of teaching's recognition and reward around the scholarship of teaching and learning, but even more broadly than that. And those of us who've been working in this arena for years may just want to put our heads down on the desk like that student who'd just kind of given up. How can we make progress on this? Well, okay, I'm an optimist. I imagine you wouldn't be here if you weren't inclined in that direction. Let me point to some signs of progress that I think we can build on. The first one's kind of obvious. Lots of campuses have grants and sabbaticals and so forth that can be turned toward pedagogical aims. Lots of graduate programs now have courses about pedagogy in the field. I think as well of the CERTL program some of you know about. That's the Center for the Integration of Teaching, Learning, Research and Learning. Do I have that in the right order? Which involves STEM faculty, STEM postdocs for the most part, and graduate students in doing scholarship of teaching and learning like projects. So too quick account, but you get the idea. The Modern Language Association just created a funded project to involve graduate students in pedagogical research. I mean, there's interesting developments. Broader conceptions of teaching and learning, of scholarship and of teaching, The University of Kansas has created a framework for the evaluation of teaching and learning, which recognizes that teaching is not simply what occurs in the classroom between you and students. It also involves course design, assignment design, reflection, going public in ways that others can build on. New models for documenting and evaluating teaching. I mentioned the Bayview Alliance back several slides as a context for my thinking about this. The Bayview Alliance is now engaged in an NSF-funded project which kind of takes off from that KU framework and is working with selected departments, I think all of them are STEM departments at this point, to figure out some new ways to evaluate teaching, which are not simply dependent on student course ratings, but involve peer review, the review of materials, course portfolios, new policies for rewarding the scholarship of teaching and learning. I'm going to just keep going here. And here at Purdue, I mean, we need not just policies, we need things that happen. And there's clear evidence that faculty involved in that kind of work have been recognized for it at Purdue. Okay, I don't think we're going to do this in quite the way I had imagined because we're coming to the end of our time. So what I was going to do is ask different tables to address one or another of these. But let me just throw it open here for questions or comments. Do the sort of strategies that I'm putting out there ring bells for you? What else would you add? And then we'll come back around and I'll try to pull things together a little bit. But if you have a question or a comment, let's take a few minutes for that. Dan? Dan.
Chantal saw number 2 up there and knew I had to ask. Because one of the things that we just started doing in Impact this semester is bringing students into the room with faculty, and it's been an interesting experience. And so far, everyone seems to have gotten a lot out of it, but it's trying to figure out in what ways we can incorporate them. So I'm wondering if you can speak to ways you've seen students brought into faculty learning communities or sort of course design programs like this and what roles they have. We've so far been really happy with this in our sort of initial test phases, and we're trying to figure out where this might go from here.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think I have a very good answer. I see a lot of sort of acknowledgement that it's a good idea, but it's also one that needs to be treated delicately. You want to not put the students on the hot seat. I think, thinking about students as part of an assignment design process, which would be sort of a subset of what you're talking about, I guess. I think one of the things I'm starting to see is students looking at the assignment and saying back to the faculty member, here's what I think you're asking. So it's a kind of reality check role. I mean, you could imagine, though, pushing that along and asking them, is this something that would be interesting to you? Trying to get their read on what John Bean talks about as tasks as intriguing problems. Is this intriguing to you? What would make it more intriguing? So it's a great question, and I think it would be lovely to have more examples, more concrete examples of the role that students can play. So thanks for putting that on the table.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Okay, great.
Actually, I have a couple concrete examples.
Great, that's what we want.
So at the University of Michigan, I'm part of the Foundational Course Initiative. We have course design teams that are very intentionally, I don't know, they like to call them multi-generational, which is a word that I really, really hate, but functional roles, right? So undergraduates, graduate student instructors, advising, all of them are part of this conversation. And it is just so fantastic having undergraduate students who have just taken it. They're involved from the very beginning of, for this class, for Public Health 100, what do you wish it could be? If you were 5 years out, what was one thing, right? Putting them all the way along that visioning process is just so exciting. Tapping into what are the really brilliant moments of class right now that we want to maximize, they are the best ones to do that. What are the obstacles? Nobody can identify the obstacles better than the students, right? And so they're talking about where do they study? It's just so enriching to have them there. Assignment design, we've had undergraduates look at assignments and walk through how they would answer it, how they would do it, where they would go for their resources to investigate it. So that can give a nice gauge of how long do we think students would actually take to do an assignment, to complete an assignment. What kind of bottlenecks could they be encountering? What kind of resources can we build in that we might not otherwise have thought about? Anyway. Every step is where students need to be involved. It's just so exciting.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'm coming over this way.
Guess I could give you mine, but.
Well, thank you very much for mentioning the scholarship of teaching and learning in graduate programs. So my question to you, how do you really, if you look at, there is a graduate program, there are professional schools, there is an undergraduate program. Whatever happens at the undergraduate program can be tracked actually in professional schools, especially if they are from the same university or other university. How do you build bridges? What can you do to actually build bridges between these so there will be a continuum of teaching and learning across the campus? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it goes back to something Jenny, I guess, said about, you know, when we're thinking about culture, it's not just little pockets here and there, it's how things are connected. And I'm going to go back to assignment design as one possible way to build bridges. One of the things we, NILOA, have tried to encourage in the work that campuses are doing locally around assignment design is that they bring teams together. So I'm teaching a first-year course, and you're teaching a capstone in my program. We should be talking to each other about how the assignments we're respectively using, building, could connect to each other in ways that would help students build, you know, experience more sort of coherent pathways. And I hadn't thought of the graduate dimension to that, but thinking about adding that into the picture is interesting. So anytime you can get people talking not just about their own work, but about how my work becomes our work, you've made a big step forward.
Faculty is plural.
Pardon?
The word faculty is plural.
Yes, it is. That's right.
All of
The corporate faculty. Yeah. Yes, thank you. One more back there. Excuse me.
I just wanted to address number 2 up there, and was at a conference last year in which a fascinating presentation was done by one of the California state schools. And what they had done was they had done a program where they had solicited the students initially to help educate other students on how to produce better course evaluations. So students were educating other students in how to do a better job of evaluating their courses. But a byproduct of that was the individual faculties were partnering with students in courses, doing formative assessment and improving the courses as they went throughout the semester. So there was a partnership between faculty and students, and then eventually students were educating students on how to do a better job of course evaluation.
That's great. And some of that shows up in that second volume that I featured but didn't really talk about by Peter Felton and 2 colleagues. I know UC Merced has a program that's kind of like what you're describing. So that's a great example. So thank you. All right, I'm going to scoot ahead here to the big idea. And do you know what that is? You've all heard this metaphor. It's higher education, the great big lumbering ship. I was working on these slides on an airplane with my husband seated next to me, and he looked over and said, "Is that the Titanic?" Well, no, I don't think it is, though, you know, we've got some challenges, we've got some problems. Okay, so higher education, this is to take us back to the scholarship of teaching and learning. That big ship is hard to turn, though here, look, it's going the other direction. And here is the scholarship of teaching and learning tugboat. That little tug, the scholarship of teaching and learning is not big, it isn't. You know, I mentioned, you know, like an organization of 800, maybe 1,000 people, but they're doing important work, and there's a lot of power. What is the phrase from boxing? You punch beyond your weight? Yeah, I prefer the tugboat. Tugboat, the scholarship of teaching and learning is nimble, hardworking, a little pushy, we hope, and going in the right direction, which is toward this. I'll just let you read it. All right. So that's the big idea. That's what I want to leave you with, but there's more. Just to point to these. This is the organization I mentioned, the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. This is just the appendix, folks. And there is a conference every year. It's in Atlanta this next year. Last year it was in Norway. Get in on it when it's someplace you want to go. It's a great conference. Right, Kim? And I mentioned the MLA, Modern Language Association. This is just to say a number of scholarly societies, your disciplinary and professional organizations, are doing work that is maybe not always named the scholarship of teaching and learning, though often it is, and have created new outlets, new conversations, new publications, conferences. So take a look at what's going on in your own field. See communications, math, and history here. Again, National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. All of our materials are open source, everything. There is too much on the site. It's being redesigned to help you navigate more successfully. But here's the assignment library initiative they're pointed to. And finally, there's a little bibliography at the end. So with that, ta-da! Onward and upward and happy sailing, or whatever it is you do in that big boat. So thank you, everybody.